Today we're going to take a look at the topic Designing Reading Plans for Narrative Text. Narrative meaning that it's a story. All of the skills come into play, whether it's phonics, vocabulary, word identification skills, or comprehension. But when the child actually sits down to read, we need to focus primarily on comprehension. And so that's what we're going to address today as you think about your reading lesson plans and how to make them most effective for your students as they are going to read. Reading lessons should be planned by structuring activities that you will present before the reading, during the reading, and then after the reading as well. The purpose of activities for before the reading include activating prior knowledge for students to think about what they already know about this topic and what that will mean in making connections to what they're about to read. Also, you want them to set a purpose for reading, not just reading to be reading, but as they read, they're looking for specifics in the reading, whether it's answers to their questions or making predictions. You could have them to look at the cover of the book and see what they think the book might be about, who might the characters be. And from those predictions, as they read, they are looking specifically to answers about their predictions and perhaps even making further predictions based on what they've read. You will want them to know something about text structure. Stories, of course, include literary elements such as characters, setting, plot, conclusion, and the theme. And so reminding students about this or even providing a mini lesson prior to their reading will help them in their comprehension of what they're about to read. And then finally, you want to make sure that they have the skills to address vocabulary. Identify the vocabulary that will be important in the story for them to grasp and either give definitions or have some sort of activity to help them to come to the meaning on their own. During reading, you want them to not only read but monitor their comprehension if they're understanding what is taking place. Therefore, you set a purpose by having them to predict what they're going to encounter. Have them to look for textual evidence to either confirm their predictions or to reject them. And at this point also, they can revise any predictions that would have been the wrong ones for them to make at the beginning of the lesson. And then finally, at the end, after they've completed the reading, have them to reflect on what they have read. What part of the story did they like the best, or perhaps the least? What do they think that the author did, or the illustrator, if it's a picture book, what do they think that they did well? What do they think they were trying to convey? So making reflections of this sort is tied into comprehension, as well as making connections from themselves to several different areas. It can be a connection to a personal experience they had that went along with the protagonist in the story. Or it could be a connection to another book about the same topic or another book that the same author has written and comparing those. Or it could be a connection between what took place in this story and something that they read about or heard about in the world in general. So we're going to start first with a book that is appropriate for young readers. Before reading, I would want to make sure they understood the vocabulary. This particular book is called The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. Now, you could do a picture walk in the beginning as well before they're reading, starting with the cover, asking them what they see, and obviously there's a little boy here, and he's outside and it's snowing. It's probably somewhere in a town or a city because you see a traffic light here, okay? But as they go along, You can ask them to further clarify what they think might happen in the story. It starts out and he's waking up there in the morning to look out the window and he sees it snowing on the ground. We find him outside in the snow. He's making footprints in different shapes outside. Then he picks up a stick and begins to drag his feet and the stick in the snow. He sees the snow up on a tree and blops it with the stick, which means it falls down and hits him in the head. He encounters some boys who are having a snowball fight, and he wants to join them, but they think he's too young, and they don't allow him to do that. Makes snow angels in the snow. And we can just see a lot of other things that's taking place, including when he returns home. And they see, wow, he's in the tub, and he's holding up his coat there, and it appears that he's searching for something, but unless we read the text at this point, we don't know what. And here's a picture of the sunshine, and on the very next page, a picture of snow as he's looking out the window, okay? So that could be a picture walk where they're anticipating and setting predictions of what takes place in the story. Now, in addition to this, you can address vocabulary words. And the snowy day has a lot of compound words. So this is an excellent opportunity for you as the teacher to show them how to break those words apart, the compound words, into two words so that they can determine what the meaning is, okay? So for example, we have this compound word, everywhere. So you could have them actually to cut it and to see that that word's made up of two words, every and where. And ask them, based on those two words, what they think the compound word everywhere would mean. We also have several having to do with the word snow. This particular one is made up of the two words snow and man. So hopefully they would understand it would be a man that's made out of snow. Similar one, snow ball, is a word that's made by putting together the two smaller words, snow and ball. Here's another one with snow, snow suit, which would be some kind of suit that you would wear when you're going outside. Back up just a second. Which would be some kind of suit which would be made to go outside and to play in the snow that would keep you warm. We have the word, compound word something, which is a general term meaning something that was put together. Okay? So that would be what a couple of activities you could do before the reading. Then during the reading, you're asking them to look specifically at the sequential order of events at the story. And as they read, have them to write or draw. If it's very young children and they can't spell that well yet, you could actually have them to draw what takes place at the beginning, what takes place in the middle, and what takes place at the end. Now, were we to read the story right now, we would find out that the central character's name is Peter, and Peter woke up one morning to find out that it was snowing. He was excited, and so he got up and went outside to play. And so that sets the stage at the beginning of the story for what's going to take place. A number of things happened, but one of the main things in the middle was that he wanted to be in the snowball fight, but the big boys said that he was too little. In fact, they're throwing snowballs at Peter to chase him away because he's too young. At the end of the story, Peter has a dream. He dreams that the sun came out and melted all of his snow, and he's not going to be able to play anymore. But instead, he woke up, went to the window, and realized it was just a dream, because not only was the snow still there, but it was snowing even more. So providing structure for something for them to record as they read, okay, will give them the opportunity to demonstrate their comprehension of what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. And then finally, after reading, you can ask them to make connections. They can make a text to self connection. Oh, I've been in the snow before and I've made snow angels, that sort of thing. Or, I've never been in the snow. I live in a warm area of Florida or southern Texas. I would love to do that. I have had lots of rain and sunshine. I can understand how sunshine would melt that snow, but I've never had that to happen to me. Or text to the world. They could say, I've seen pictures of snowstorms that have taken place in New York City, or of all the snow that there is in Alaska or the far north. And so I know that a lot of times it really does snow, and that kids do get out and they play in the snow. I've seen that on TV. And then a final one, a text-to-text connection. You might have a child say, I enjoyed the snowy day, and I also know that in the library there's another book about snow called Snowflake Bentley. Now this is an informational text, whereas the snowy day is a story that's just made up. But Snowflake Bentley is about a real man that lived in Vermont, where they have lots of snow, and he was so interested in snow until he studied it and took pictures of the various types of snowflakes and cataloged them. And so they can learn about snow here and the research that's been done on snow, as well as thinking about how much snow can be very, very fun for young children and the activities that they can do in that. The next book that we're going to look at will be a book called The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, written by Christopher Paul Curtis. This book takes place in Detroit, Michigan initially, and it's about a very loving family called the Watsons. Within the Watsons, we have the mom and the dad, the main character who is Kenny, his brother Byron, who they call the juvenile delinquent, and their younger sister Joetta. During the first part of the book, it's all about how Byron gets into trouble and is absolutely driving his mom and his dad crazy. And they're afraid that he's making friends that are not going to be a good influence on him. And so they come to a decision. They decide that they're going to take a trip to Birmingham, Alabama, where the mother is from, and that Byron is going to spend the summer with Grandma Sands. Grandma Sands is a no-nonsense, very strict matriarchal figure. And so they think it will do him well to stay with her during the summertime. But what they don't realize, during 1963, of course, this was during the Civil Rights era, and African Americans were persecuted by a lot of different groups. And they arrive in Birmingham about the same time that the church bombings took place there. And so there's a lot of conflict within here, as well as a lot of humor and historical facts that took place. So before reading, you would want to think about, first of all, perhaps we could get a map out of the United States and see where Birmingham is, and then also Detroit, and see the route and trace the route that they would have to go in order to travel from Detroit to Birmingham. You would also think about any vocabulary that might be appropriate to present to them. Now, 1963 was a very long time ago, but they did have technology, not as we have today, but in a little bit different form. And there, in one of the chapters, it talks about how the dad, in order to entertain them on the way to Birmingham, purchased something called an ultra glide. Now, an ultra glide is going to be very unfamiliar, I'm sure, to your students. It was unfamiliar to me. So one way of developing this concept about what an ultraglide is by using a vocabulary map. And I have a vocabulary map right here that has the term ultraglide in the middle. But instead of just telling your students what it is or how to pronounce it or giving a simplistic definition, let's look at it from several different viewpoints. First of all, you could take a box and define it initially by answering the question, what is it? And then within that, write down what it is. And an ultraglide was actually a record player that could be placed on the console of a car and would play the records without being affected by the bumps in the road as the car went down the road, which would cause the arm of the record player to jump over different types of music in different places. So that's what it would be defined. What is its purpose? Its purpose was simply to entertain. They could play songs and sing along with it and perhaps even have some stories to make the long trip between Detroit and Birmingham a little less boring and would entertain them. And then finally, what does it look like? Within the story itself, there's an excerpt that describes that it has a turntable, it has a needle at the end of the arm, and they could draw this. You could even perhaps find a picture of an ultraglide, or you could simply use the words to talk about what an ultraglide is. So by looking at it from a definition and what the purpose is and what it looks like, when the children encounter the story of the ultraglide in one of the chapters, then they will have a much better comprehension of what's taking place and how that relates to this part of the story. Remember how we talked about text structure at the beginning of our time together and how that would help students to understand and comprehend what is taking place in the story? Story maps are great visuals to enable them to look for these items as they are reading and see how they relate to each other. For example, in The Watsons Go to Birmingham, they find out in chapter 1 that the story takes place in Birmingham, Alabama in the year 1963. So as they encounter that, then they can record it in the part of the story map that identifies the setting. The characters, there are a number of characters, but we want them to focus primarily on the main characters. And so there would be the Watson family. In fact, chapter 1 is called Those Weird Watsons. But the protagonist, the character that the story is primarily about, is Kenny. Okay. We also have a number of events. There are many, many things that happen to this because it is a chapter book, but we would want them to record the main events that took place and the ones that they felt were most important to the development of the story. So you could talk about how Byron gets into trouble, then the family decides to take him to Grandma Sands, so they travel to Birmingham. While they are there, the bombs go off in the church. Which traumatizes Kenny to a very great extent, and they decide to return home. Now, there's a lot more to this story than that, but those are the main events in sequential order. So they return home to Detroit with Byron. Byron is not left at Grandma Sands, but they return home. The conclusion of the story takes place when Kenny is able to overcome being traumatized by his brother, the brother that had persecuted him seemingly at the beginning of the book, Byron. So Kenny is helped by Byron. And then you would ask the students, what was the author trying to say through this? Lots of different ways that you could address this particular theme, but family is important. Would be one thing that they would come away from this story with. So that would be a during reading activity to help them see the different components of the story and make a visual that would help them as well. All right, finally, we're going to take a look at an activity that you can use after the reading. Remember we were talking earlier about making text connections, text to self, text to the world, and text to other text. This book, called One Crazy Summer, takes place during the 1960s as well, just like The Watsons Go to Birmingham is set in that period. But these girls, instead of in the South, are going to California. Their mother, Cecile Johnson, left them and left their dad and went to California and has become involved with a group there called the Black Panthers. The girls were sent there by their dad because he felt like they should know their mom and should visit with her, which they obviously don't get to do since they are on the East Coast. And so students may have read this book before they read The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and they could use this particular visual called a Venn diagram to compare the two, because there are similarities and there are differences. One of the similarities would be that they both took place during the 1960s and during the Civil Rights Movement. The characters in both books are African American. Now, there are differences as well. One Crazy Summer has primarily female characters and addresses the effect that the Black Panther movement had during the Civil Rights Movement. The Watsons, on the other hand, took place in the South and talked about a lot of the persecution that African Americans went through in the South. So comparing and contrasting the two texts here would be a way that students could demonstrate their comprehension on a pretty high level to see how these two texts are alike and how they are different. So I hope you've been able to glean at least an activity that you can use when planning lessons for students that would be implemented before reading, during reading, and after reading to aid comprehension.